Food and Drug Administration user fees for another 5 years. Those fees pay for FDA reviews of prescription drugs and medical devices. It creates new programs to monitor generic drugs and to track prescription drugs nationally. At 2 Eastern, senators will vote on up to 11 amendments before a vote on final passage. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, the giver of every good and perfect gift, thank you for all that makes life worthwhile. Thank you for tasks to do, for health of body, for accuracy of hand and eye, for skill of mind, and for friends and loved ones. Today, equip the minds of our senators with 3 assurances to sustain them. Remind them of your sovereignty, your power, and your love. Give them the wisdom to believe that there is no problem or circumstance beyond your control. May this knowledge guide their thinking, speaking, and decisions in a way that will glorify you. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., May 24, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority leaders recognized.
We're now considering S3187, the FDA user fees legislation. There's an agreement now reached to complete this legislation today. Under the agreement, the debate time will expire at 2 p.m. today, but if we're able to yield back time, up to 12 roll call votes could begin earlier in order to complete action on the bill and to have a couple votes in relation to the student loan interest rate hike. We'll notify everyone if time is yielded back, but people should be aware of the need for you to come here, we hope, before noon to have a couple votes. There'll be no votes between 1 and 2 o'clock because of meetings that both sides have. So we also hope that we worked out a tentative agreement yesterday on flood insurance, which is important to 6 million people. We need to get that done today also. Hope we can get that done. Mr. President, I was pleased yesterday to reach an agreement with the Republican leader on how to move forward with this FDA bill. This legislation will ease shortages of life-saving medicines by establishing a protocol to accomplish just that. It will ensure FDA resources are there to approve new drugs and medical devices quickly and efficiently. We're going to consider, as I've indicated, a number of relevant amendments, and I'm optimistic that we'll pass this strong bipartisan vote. The week's been productive, and Mr. President, we have not had to break or try to break a single Republican filibuster. That is a good day in Washington. It doesn't happen very often. I hope it happens more often. If this trend continues, we could return to the way we used to be. That is, do things that were good for the country and not be trying to stop everything that comes along. I'm also hopeful this week that the Senate will be able to find a path ahead to temporarily renew the flood insurance program, as I've already indicated. We need a long-term solution to this problem. We have about 40,000 loans every day are approved. They're approved because you can make that check that you do have flood insurance. If there's no way to buy flood insurance, you can't make that check in that box and you can't get a loan. This would be devastating to our fragile economy. We've got to get this done and get it done before the end of this month. The collaborative work on that measure and the FDA bill renew my hope that Congress will reach an agreement to prevent student loan interest rates from doubling for 7 million young men and women. We'll vote on 2 proposals to freeze student interest rates at their current levels. The Republican proposal is paid for by stripping Americans of life-saving preventive health care. Can't say any more clearly than that. It would be a shame to use that pay for. That program has already been stripped bare. To take any more from it would really hurt the health of America. Our proposal is paid for by closing a loophole that allows wealthy Americans to dodge their taxes. Now, Mr. President, I'm certainly aware of how things work around here. Neither one of these things are going to pass. Sorry to say. These 2 proposals were not created equal. But I hope a few reasonable Republicans will join with us to not put Americans' health at risk. We need to come to an agreement on the student loan issue. We only have until the end of June to do this. Also, Mr. President, I hope to resolve an issue dealing with paycheck fairness over the next work period. In addition to that, we're going to deal with the Farm Bill, flood insurance, as I've talked about, a small business tax relief program, and cybersecurity, and some appropriation bills. Last Congress, we passed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, named after this stalwart woman from the South who was, in effect, cheated out of the pay she deserved. She did the same work for many, many years as men, didn't get the same money. She sought redress in the courts, and they said, no, you can't do that. You should have done it when you first started work there. Well, she didn't know she was being cheated at that time. But we changed the law. Now people in the same situation as Ledbetter is not going to be bound by some phony set of rules that prevent someone from filing a lawsuit when they've been aggrieved. The wage gap has narrowed in 5 decades since Congress declared women entitled to equal pay for equal work. Gender discrimination, but it remains a serious problem in the workplace. The work we did with Lilly Ledbetter was the single most important piece of legislation to ensure women that have a chance to protect themselves. It's something we should have done before. We didn't. It's done now. Women make up about half of today's workforce. More than half the students in our law schools, women. More than half the students in medical schools are women. They still, though, only earn 77 cents on every dollar compared to their male colleagues for doing the same work. And with an increasing number of women heading into leading American households, this is a problem that affects children and families across the country. The legislation led by Senator Barbara Mikulski, Paycheck Fairness Act, is a logical extension of protections under the Equal Pay Act. It will help close the gap by empowering women to negotiate for equal pay and creating strong incentives for employers to obey the laws already in place. Republicans deny they're waging a war on women, yet they've launched a series of attacks on women's access to health care and contraception this year. Now they have an opportunity to back up their excuses with action, and we're going to give them that opportunity. We hope they'll join us as we send a clear message that America values the incredible contributions women make every day. Would the chair be so kind as to announce the work we're going to do here today?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 3187, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 400, S3187, a bill to amend the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and so forth, and for other purposes.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent to call up Amendment 2107 and make it pending.
Without objection, the clerk will report.
The senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain, proposes an amendment number 2107.
That further
Without
reading
objection.
be suspended. Mr. President, this is not a new issue. This has been before this body on several occasions, and I want to assure my colleagues that if the lobbyists for the pharmaceutical companies in this town are able to block this, we will be revisiting this issue. This is an issue of fundamental fairness and decency and giving Americans the opportunity to have access to the very important medication that in many cases is life-saving. Has been blocked by one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington, and that is the pharmaceutical companies. For years, along with many other senators and the current occupant of the White House, the President of the United States, when he was a United States Senator, supported this amendment. I'd love to see the administration weigh in and take the same position that then Senator Obama took on this issue of basic and fundamental decency and fairness to people who are badly in need of medicine to, in many cases, literally save their lives. The industry opponents of the comprehensive importation proposals have found various ways to confuse the issue, raise red herrings about safety, or cut secret deals to block passage of reasonable and widely supported prescription drug importation programs. Let me just give you an example that recently came up about the activities of the pharmaceutical companies in the formulation of Obamacare. And as I quote from, quote, GOP probe uncovers deal between Obama and drug companies by Philip Klein, the senior editorial writer of the Washington Examiner. It goes on, and I quote, 3 years ago, President Obama cut a secret deal with pharmaceutical company lobbyists to secure the industry support for his national health care law. Despite Obama's promises during his campaign to run a transparent administration, the deal has been shrouded in mystery ever since. But internal emails obtained by House Republicans now provide evidence that a deal was struck, and GOP investigators are promising to release more details in the coming weeks. Quote, what the hell, unquote, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Jim Messina, who is now Obama's campaign manager, complained to a lobbyist for the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, known as PhRMA, on January 15, 2010, email, quote, this wasn't part of our deal, unquote. In reference to our deal came 2 months before the final passage of Obamacare in an email with the subject line, quote, Tauzan email. At the time, Billy Tauzan was president and CEO of PhRMA. I might add, one of the highest-paid lobbyists in history, millions of dollars. The email was uncovered as part of an investigation into Obama's closed-door health care negotiations that was launched by the House Energy and Commerce Committee's oversight panel. Quote, in the coming weeks, the committee intends to show that the White House agreed to do as part of its deal with the pharmaceutical industry and how the full details of this agreement were kept from both the public and the House of Representatives, the committee's Republican members wrote in a memo today. On June 20, 2009, Obama released a terse 296-word statement announcing a deal between pharmaceutical companies and the Senate that didn't mention any involvement by the White House. Quote, the investigation has determined that the White House, primarily through Office of Health Reform Director Nancy Ann DePerle and Messina, with involvement from Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel, was actively engaged in these negotiations while the role of Congress was limited. The committee members wrote, quote, for example, 3 days before the June 20th statement, the head of PhRMA, that's Mr. Tauzan, promised Messina, quote, we will deliver a final yes to you by morning. Meanwhile, Ms. DeParle all but confirmed that half the legislative branch was shut out in an email to PhRMA representatives, quote, I think we should have included the House in the discussions, but maybe we never would have gotten anywhere if we had tried. You know, what went on in the formulation of Obamacare is still one of the worst, sleaziest exercises that I have seen in my many years here, and this involvement by the pharmaceutical companies was probably the most egregious. All this amendment does, it allows U.S. consumers who need more affordable prescription drug options either to go without their medications or pay higher prices than they could get from legitimate Canadian pharmacies. But that's not a reason. There's not a reason for us to stop fighting for those in the United States who need more affordable prescription medications. There are Americans in this country today who cannot afford their medications. They have a choice between eating or taking their prescription drugs. Meanwhile, there is a way for them to get much cheaper drugs, and this amendment does that. And you'll hear them from the pharmaceutical company supporters here in the Senate who will talk about safety, and Canadians don't have the same standards that we do. Really? Do we really believe that the Canadian regulations and oversight are any better or worse than the United States? To ensure that U.S. patients have at least one option, this amendment takes a very narrow approach to safe importation by focusing on legitimate Canadian pharmacies. Under this amendment, The Secretary of Health and Human Services will certify, quote, approved Canadian pharmacies based on certain safety and quality criteria to ensure that patients are not exposed to unsafe medications. Approved Canadian pharmacies can only sell drugs to U.S. customers that are the same as U.S. approved drugs. To protect U.S. patients against rogue distributors, a list of approved Canadian pharmacies must be published by the Secretary of Health and Human Services so Americans know which Canadian pharmacies are legitimate. The cost of health care, including prescription drugs, continues to increase. However, there's nothing in the underlying FDA bill that will bring down the cost of prescription drugs. I wonder if the bill should be enacted when it doesn't do anything to address costs. The quality of pharmaceuticals in this country is outstanding, and I recognize that. But don't we all know how expensive it is? Don't we know that, for example, that in the United States of America, Nexium, 20 milligram, 30 tabs, $195.99. The Canadian brand, $108.55. Canadian generic, $69. Plavix, U.S. brand, $195. Canada brand, $132. I am sure that many Americans whose health coverage does not include these very expensive pharmaceuticals would be eager to take advantage of the same quality brand of prescription drugs that's available at these pharmacies in Canada. Unemployment remains over 8%, as we all know. Millions of families have mothers and fathers who remain unemployed or underemployed and have no health insurance coverage. But the unemployed and uninsured still have health conditions, and they need medications. And millions continue searching for more affordable ways to get their needed prescription drugs. Unfortunately, in my state, many of my fellow citizens who can't afford it go to Mexico and get drugs there, and I can't guarantee what they purchase there will always be what it's purported to be. And that is not a criticism of my friends south of the border. But the fact is that in Canada, they have the same kind of process that we do. Well, millions continue searching for more. Despite there being no official program to import medications from Canada, approximately 1 million U.S. consumers use their own money to safely get their medications from legitimate Canadian pharmacies. In Arizona, over 20,000 patients purchase their medications safely from Canadian pharmacies. In Florida, over 85,000 patients purchase their medications safely from Canadian pharmacies. A recent study from Roger Bate, an AEI scholar, confirms that in drugs dispensed from legitimate Canadian pharmacies, there was no failure of authenticity between drug samples obtained online from U.S. pharmacies compared to the same drug from Canadian pharmacies. And within the verified pharmacies, U.S. prices on average were 52.5% higher than Canadian pharmacy prices. In other words, the drugs from Canadian pharmacy sites are the same dosage, form, and potency as drugs in the U.S., only much less expensive. The drugs are the same as I mentioned. This amendment doesn't authorize insurance companies, huge pharmacy chains, or drug wholesalers to import massive quantities into the U.S. system. This is about safely allowing uninsured, unemployed, or the underemployed to individually import these drugs that they need. So please, somebody explain to me how we tell the struggling family who needs their medications that they can't use their own money to get the same drug from legitimate Canadian pharmacies where the cost can be more than 50% lower than U.S. prices. And it's not about the alarms of safety because this amendment requires the Secretary of Health and Human Services to promulgate regulations permitting individuals to safely import medications from Canada, and the following safety criteria must be met for a patient to import drugs from FDA-approved Canadian pharmacies. The prescribed drug must be dispensed by a licensed Canadian pharmacist. The prescribed drug must be for personal use in quantities that don't exceed a 90-day supply. The prescribed drug must be dispensed in accordance with a valid prescription issued by a physician licensed to practice in the U.S. The imported drug must have, quote, the same active ingredient or ingredients, route of administration, dosage form, and strength as a prescription drug approved by the Secretary. The amendment recognizes that approved Canadian pharmacies meeting safety criteria can and should provide needed alternatives to U.S. patients using their own money to affordably obtain their medications. The Secretary is required to publish on the FDA website a list of approved Canadian pharmacies that meet the following stringent criteria. Pharmacy has been in existence for 5 years prior to enactment of the program and has a purpose other than to participate in the U.S.-Canadian Safe Drug Importation Program. The pharmacy operates in accordance with provincial pharmacy rules and regulations. The pharmacy complies with all inspection and data reporting procedures. The pharmacy agrees that labs approved by the Secretary shall be used to conduct product testing to determine the safety and efficacy of sample pharmaceutical products. The pharmacy does not resell products from online pharmacies located outside Canada to consumers in the U.S. Safe drug importation is a bipartisan issue. People in all of our states are still struggling with family budgets, and the U.S. Senate can't do anything to give patients more choices about where they can get their needed drugs because the drug industry opposes allowing individual Americans to use their own money to safely get the same drugs from Canada. It doesn't make sense. Just a word about the types of medications that are eligible. I've been asked by colleagues whether biologic medicines can be part of the program. The answer is not unless they can be safely imported under the provisions of the amendment and regulations issued by the Secretary. The amendment doesn't discriminate against the type of conditions or medicines that patients should be able to safely import under this program. Not all biologics are the same. Some biologic medicines are available in capsules, others injectable medications that require refrigeration. Some injectables don't require refrigeration and are shipped to patients throughout the U.S. every day. A one-size-fits-all approach does not work here. And I don't believe that U.S. patients should necessarily be prevented from saving money on biologics. If a biologic medicine can't meet the various safety provisions in the amendment, then it should not be eligible. But if it can meet the requirements of the amendment, then a biologic can be available to U.S. patients. Mr. President, if the past is a prologue, then obviously this amendment will go down. And then after this amendment is rejected, I hope that none of my colleagues have any curiosity about the way the American people feel about us, about the incredible, inordinate, illegitimate, outrageous influence of the pharmaceutical companies in America over the average American citizen. American citizens should be able to purchase pharmaceuticals from an approved pharmacy in Canada that in many times are saving them half the money. I'm sure that the distinguished chairman, my friend from Iowa, knows how many families do not have prescription drug coverage, that are making a choice today between eating and medicine. And what are we going to do? We're going to turn down this common sense amendment. Congratulations ahead of time to the corrupt pharmaceutical companies and their influence here in the United States Senate and the Capitol. Mr. President, I ask for yeas and nays on the amendment.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The yeas and nays are ordered. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Iowa is recognized.
Then the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I understand the Republican leader is about due on the floor to give his leader's remarks. I just want to let senators know that we're moving ahead on the bill. We still have, Senator McCain has just brought up his amendment and spoken on it. I know there are some who want to speak in opposition to the McCain amendment. We still have amendment number 2111 by Senator Bingaman to be called up. We have two amendments, 2146 by Senator Portman and 2145 by Senator Portman. That needs to be called up. I ask senators to please come over and call up their amendments so we can debate these and move ahead to expeditiously voting on those amendments and the final passage of the bill. I see the Republican leaders on the floor. I yield the floor.
The Republican leader is recognized. Agreement on the bill, are we? The leader is correct.
Then I would like to proceed under my leader time.
The senator has that right.
Mr. President, today we will once again attempt to prevent student loan interest rates from going up. This problem could have been solved literally weeks ago, but our friends on the other side were not interested in solving the problem. They wanted a scapegoat more than a solution. So this afternoon we'll vote on two different ways of addressing the issue. The Democratic plan is designed to fail. In order to cover the cost of a temporary rate freeze that both parties actually want, they propose to divert $6 billion from Medicare and to raise taxes on small businesses, hurting the very companies we're counting on to hire today's college graduates. They've known for months that we won't support this tax hike and that it couldn't pass this chamber or the House of Representatives. It has already failed, but they're proposing it anyway a second time. If our Democratic friends would allow it, the chairman and ranking member could write a bill that could actually pass. But since the passage isn't their goal, our friends on the other side huddle behind closed doors out of sight of the public and the press and produce the tax hike instead of letting the committee actually do its work. Now, we already know how this story is going to end. We know exactly already how the story will end. So why are the Democrats forcing us to vote on their failed proposal yet again? Because, as I've said, they're more interested in drawing our opposition of trying to create a bad guy here than in actually solving the problem. When it comes to college graduates today, the bigger issue is the president's economic agenda, which has created an environment in which most of them can't find a decent job. So I can understand why our Democratic friends want to change the subject. But if we're actually going to do something to solve the problem, we're going to need to get past the political theatrics. If Senate Democrats reject the bipartisan fix that the House already passed, one that doesn't raise taxes or divert a single dollar away from Medicare and is an offset that they have used themselves before, then I hope they will turn around and work with us on a bipartisan fix that doesn't tax small businesses, a proposal that is actually designed to pass and become law. But let's be clear about something. The real issue here isn't the fact that certain students are going to see an interest rate hike, because we will address that concern. It's that so many young people today can't find a job that would enable them to pay off their loans in the first place. That's the much larger problem. And the solution is a pro-growth agenda that would make it easier for U.S. businesses to hire, not a tax hike that will make it actually harder for them to hire. In the short term, Republicans are ready to work to offer this temporary relief, but we're still waiting on the Democratic leadership to propose a solution of their own that can actually pass either one or two chambers of Congress. And I would once again urge the President to get involved. If the President's got time to run around to late-night comedy shows and college campuses talking about this issue, then he can pick up the phone and work out a solution with Democrats here in the Senate. Last week at the White House, I pressed the President to get involved in order to prevent the student interest rates from going up, a goal we all share. Think about it. if the President really wants to pass this bill so badly, then why on earth hasn't he picked up the phone and called the chairman or ranking Republican of the relevant committee? As with so many pressing issues, the President has not led on this issue. He has campaigned on it, but he's not worked to actually fix it. The American people are tired of the posturing and the games. It's time for the President to lead. It's time for Senate Democrats to stop the political theater and to find a real solution. Now, on another matter, I want to take a moment to thank my good friend, the senior senator from Wyoming, Mike Enzi, for the work he has done shepherding the FDA bill through the markup and across the Senate floor. This is an incredibly complex piece of legislation that strikes a difficult balance of protecting consumers while avoiding the stifling regulation that slows the process of bringing life-saving drugs and devices to market. Throughout a lengthy process, Mike has shown the command of complex topics, steady leadership, and interest in his colleagues' priorities that have characterized his tenure at the Health Committee. And for that, those of us on this side of the aisle would like to thank him very much. Now, Mr. President, I'd like to address one other matter. I have the sad task today of informing my colleagues that a valiant and honorable Kentuckian who enlisted in the U.S. Army has fallen in the performance of his duty. On March the 29th of 2012, Specialist David W. Taylor of Dixon, Kentucky, died from injuries sustained in an accident at an ammunition supply point in Kandahar province, Afghanistan. He was 20 years old. For his service in uniform, Specialist Taylor received several awards, medals, and decorations, including the Army Commendation Medal, the Army Good Conduct Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal with Bronze Service Star, the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, the Army Service Ribbon, the Overseas Service Ribbon, the NATO Medal, the Parachutist Badge, and the Overseas Service Bar. After his tragic death at entirely too young an age, one of Specialist Taylor's commanders, Sergeant Addington, delivered a tribute to his fallen brother in arms. This is what he said. When his country called for young lives to offer themselves up for the preservation of freedom, young David Taylor answered the call and said, "Here I am, take me." Sergeant Addington says Specialist Taylor was my soldier, my battle buddy, and my friend. He was a fast learner and my greatest student. He sacrificed himself that we might be free. Before he was a soldier, his mother, Sarah Taylor, recalls that David was a compassionate, dedicated young man. From a young age, he was always looking for ways to help others. One Christmas, he had received a large amount of gifts, Sarah says. David asked his parents if he could give some of his gifts to a classmate of his who he knew would not receive many items. David was a great athlete who played football and soccer and ran track. He loved to hunt and hunted turkey and deer, but his real passion was for duck hunting. He had many friends, was the life of the party, and he was popular with girls. David would change outfits multiple times before going to school as his hair and clothes had to be perfect, Sarah says. David was also very dedicated to physical fitness. He worked out multiple times a week to stay in shape. Perhaps that is because young David knew his body was his instrument, and he had made up his mind to join the military by age 14. David's high school did not have an ROTC program, so David worked hard to graduate 6 months early and eagerly enlisted. He skipped both the prom and graduation to take up his more important pursuit, enlisting in January 2010. He even waived his signing bonus, saying it's every young man's duty to serve. Now, David planned to make the military his career and hoped to go into the medical field. He dedicated himself to the military handbook and doing everything by the book. He went on to serve as a paratrooper in a parachute infantry regiment, one of the most demanding specialties in the Army. Lieutenant Eric Fitzgerald was Specialist Taylor's platoon leader. David was one of the most outstanding paratroopers in the whole platoon, just striving to be the best, the lieutenant says. When you wanted something done, when you wanted it done right, you went to Taylor for it. Captain Brian Buffalco, David's company commander, concurs. It was evident since the day I met him that David had all the qualities desirable in a paratrooper: smart, aggressive, committed, and reliable. He displayed them readily in everything he did, the captain remembers. David maintained his rigorous workout schedule in the Army by following the CrossFit physical fitness program 5 to 6 days a week, so he could excel at the Army's physical fitness tests. He could run his 2-mile fitness test in a full minute faster than anyone else in his platoon. Specialist Taylor was assigned to D Company, 2nd Battalion, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division, based out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He deployed to Afghanistan for Operation Enduring Freedom in February of this year for what would be his first and only deployment. David's fellow soldiers from his platoon named the small gym in their Afghan outpost in his honor as a remembrance of David's commitment to excellence. And nearly every soldier in the platoon wears a metal bracelet honoring Specialist Taylor. For many of the guys, this is the first friend they've ever lost to combat, says David's friend, Sergeant First Class Russ Kelly. They wear the bracelets to remember. So, Mr. President, at this time we're thinking of Specialist David W. Taylor's family and his friends as I recount the story for the Senate, including his mother, Sarah Taylor, his grandmother, Laura Clutney, and many other beloved family members and friends. David was preceded in death by his father, Kevin Taylor. David's mother, Sarah, says that David loved the Army and was excited to be in Afghanistan. David seemed to live for the job, and while others would whine and complain in the field, David would just sling up his hammock and settle in, remembers Sergeant Addington. He was at home in the woods, a natural outdoorsman. David, who grew up in the woods, fit in perfectly. He seemed born to do this job, and I felt sorry for any Taliban that he was bound to run into in Afghanistan. The Taliban got lucky this time. Even if that's the case, Mr. President, the tragedy of Specialist Taylor's death is certainly not lucky for anyone else. Most of all, not for the family he has left behind or his friends and fellow soldiers. I know it is a small solace to place in place of what they have lost, but I want them to know that this United States Senate holds Specialist David W. Taylor in the highest regard for his service on behalf of our country. And we are honored, just a few days before Memorial Day, to recognize his enormous sacrifice on behalf of this nation. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, the senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise today in strong support of the underlying bill that we're debating, the Food and Drug Administration's Safety and Administration Act. This legislation, which has been the model of bipartisanship and effective legislating on the part of Chairman Harkin and Ranking Member Enzi, is critically important to the people of New Jersey and to the nation. This bill is about more than drug safety. It is about more than protecting patients. It's about improving the approval process to speed access to new life-saving, life-enhancing drugs and devices, and making sure the FDA is a partner in the production of safe and effective products. This bill does and accomplishes several key goals that are critically important to our nation's healthcare system. Not only does it reauthorize the key user fee agreements for prescription drugs and medical devices, but it establishes agreements for generic drugs and generic biologic drugs called biosimilars. Together, these user fee agreements will provide the FDA with the resources necessary to improve the drug and device apparel process to move more quickly and efficiently bringing new products to market. It will enhance communication between manufacturers and the agency to foster a more cooperative environment. And it will allow for better and more thorough post-market reviews to ensure continued patient safety and product efficacy. Mr. President, there's more to this bill than the FDA user fees. It permanently reauthorizes two vital programs that are a lifeline to our nation's children: the Best Pharmaceutical for Children Act and the Pediatric Research Equity Act, which are incredibly important to our children. It helps reduce and mitigate the ongoing problem of drug shortages we have heard throughout the country. It provides for enhancement to the prescription drug supply chain and increases the accountability and transparency of the Food and Drug Administration. It's good for children. It's good for business. It's good for patients. It makes the FDA a more effective partner in the process, and it demonstrates that we can reach across the aisle and work together to tackle tough issues and find solutions that benefit the people we collectively represent. This just touches the surface of what this bill will accomplish. However, this incredibly hard work could very easily be unraveled by some of the amendments being considered. It seems that once again, despite the countless times the Senate has rejected the policy that my friend from Arizona pursues, he has brought us an amendment that I believe puts Americans at risk, undermines FDA's authority, and would have a devastating ripple effect throughout our country's drug supply by allowing untraceable foreign pharmaceuticals into our country. Now, this amendment would ostensibly only allow drugs from Canada into the United States. However, nothing in the amendment comes close to ensuring that's the case. In fact, this amendment would easily allow web-based pharmacies within Canada to provide untraceable, unaccountable drugs from all over the globe into the United States market without any FDA oversight whatsoever. This amendment does not provide the FDA with any additional resources to monitor the drugs coming in from Canada, and even the Canadian authorities have said they cannot be expected to monitor all the drugs coming through their country and into ours. And boy, once one of those drugs hit and causes consequences to some family, then we will all be running and saying, how did we allow that to happen? The Senate has soundly and repeatedly voted against this type of drug importation because we understand the implications it has in bringing counterfeit and dangerous products into the nation. As we work to strengthen the FDA, I ask my colleagues to join me in opposing this amendment, which would significantly weaken the agency and put Americans at risk. Additionally, I want to address another critically important issue brought up by my friend from Vermont. The Sanders Amendment would lead to a radical change in how our nation's biotech and pharmaceutical industry achieves the process of bringing life-saving, life-enhancing drugs into the marketplace. Now, I certainly respect the passion for the issues he pursues, but there are over 200,000 people in New Jersey who work in the biopharmaceutical industry every day, who take pride in the work that they do creating breakthrough, life-saving, life-enhancing drugs. And I take issue with this characterization of an industry which is responsible for some of the world's most important medical breakthroughs that save millions of lives. And if you're one of those people waiting for one of those drugs to come to marketplace, hoping that your mother's Alzheimer's, the Alzheimer's that took my mother's life, that you finally have a breakthrough, that the husband with Parkinson's, that he will finally have a breakthrough, that your loved one with cancer finally has a breakthrough, you want to see that come to the marketplace. This industry is responsible for finding the cures and treatments for diseases that kill people and destroy family incomes. This is the industry that has more than 1,600 active clinical trials in New Jersey on drugs to treat cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, HIV/AIDS, mental and behavioral disorders. It's especially important to me personally, trials for drugs treating Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Boy, do families look forward to those breakthroughs coming to the market to help cure their loved ones. This work is what keeps our nation competitive and on the cutting edge of medical science, providing billions of dollars in economic impact annually, roughly $900 billion annually, and more than $35 billion in New Jersey, and provides countless people across the globe with life-saving medications. So, Mr. President, the amendment being offered here could have a chilling effect on all this, all of the hope for new treatments and perhaps new cures for diseases that have an opportunity to be able to be turned around, to stop having those families lose a loved one who succumbs to the disease and ruin countless lives. It has the potential to dry up investment in the next cure and severely curtail the number of high-skilled, high-paying jobs and billions of dollars in economic investment in the biopharmaceutical industry. Now, I know my friend from Vermont wants to prevent fraudulent behavior, and I wholeheartedly agree that bad actors who willfully commit fraud need to be punished, which is why we have the most incredible stiff civil and criminal penalties in current law to prosecute those who commit fraud. But ultimately taking away the incentive we have in place to attract investment in this important research, especially when the penalties could be triggered by a minor, unrelated offense, the way the amendment is written, is just plain and simple bad policy. It's like having the death penalty for a simple assault. The current intellectual property laws that protect pharmaceutical products provide researchers and their investors with a stable and predictable timeline that allows them to recoup the risky investments in research and development of new drugs. We only think about the drugs that have success, but remember, out of every 5,000 to 10,000 potential drug compounds identified, only one of those 5,000 to 10,000 potential drug compounds will result in a new medicine on the market. Do we want the companies not to take the risk of going through all those thousands and thousands of compounds to come up with the one that can be the cure for so many lives and save so much money to the government under Medicare and Medicaid and to our entire health care system? That's risky investing by anybody's standards, so removing incentives really is bad policy for the public health of the United States. This amendment will lead to uncertainty among investors. It will dry up capital. It will further delay access to new medical products. It will pull us back from the cutting-edge research and development that has always made this nation great. So, Mr. President, as I said, as my friends who are managing this bill have said, this FDA reauthorization is too important not to pass. So I urge my colleagues to reject these harmful amendments so we can move forward and have an FDA that has the ability to do the job on behalf of the American people, to create the process that will be safe, but that will give us the life-saving, life-enhancing cures that ultimately will lead to a better life for all of us. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. And observe the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Iowa is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask that further proceedings on the quorum call
Without objection.
be dispensed with. Mr. President, I ask consent that the time on quorum calls be evenly divided on the McCain amendment.
Without objection, it's so ordered.
Mr. President, I just again to say that we are rapidly coming to a close here. Again, the sooner that we can get to voting on this, the sooner that we will close out the business for the day and probably for the week. So I again would point out that we have Senator Bingham's amendment number 2111 yet to be called up. Senator Portman has two amendments, 2146 and 2145, and those basically are the only ones left to be brought up. So I would urge them to come, and others who have indicated that they wanted to come and speak on the amendments that are pending. And those would be the McCain amendment, the Sanders amendment, the Murkowski amendment, the Durbin amendment, and the Paul amendment are still pending. So if people have indicated they wanted to come over and speak on these various amendments, I would hope that they would do so that we can perhaps get to voting on the amendments and the final passage of the bill sooner rather than later. With that, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.